Okay, it is 11:07. I'm going to go ahead and start this meeting. Shouldn't call it a meeting because as of right now, it's just me. That's why it is 11:07 as opposed to 11 o'clock. I wanted to wait to make sure nobody showed up. And nobody has. I understand. So anyway, I'm going to start the recording. Before I get moving, I want to remind you that you can speed up videos. I understand I might drag on a little bit, especially if I don't have anybody here to keep me focused. So if you watch my other video, I think I'm going to try to embed it somewhere up here in this video where you can click on it and it'll watch a video and it'll show you how to speed this up. But anyway, let me get started. Here we go. Let me share my screen first of all. First thing I want to do is discuss the discussion. Let me pull this up. It's pretty straightforward. The grades were okay. Most of the bad grades were due to people simply not doing the discussion. There's a big drop off. This is actually one of the worst weeks I've ever seen as long as I've been teaching this course. I don't know what happened, but like I said, there were quite a few people who just did not participate, and I'm not really sure why. But here we go. Let me pull this up. Module 2 discussion. Pretty straightforward. I'm sure you've all read this, so bear with me, but I'm going to read it again. As the human population approaches carrying capacity, as your book says on page 108, we essentially have two solutions, right? Well, technically there's three solutions, the one of which is not listed up here is we could just ignore it, not worry about it. But if we were actually seeing this as a problem, then there's two basic solutions and a lot that would come from that. And those two solutions are we could reduce human population growth, and notice that I put growth in bold there, and or increase the carrying capacity. In this prompt, you were asked to post one possible solution and list one advantage of that solution and one disadvantage of that solution. You were not supposed to simply choose reduce human population growth or increase carrying capacity, right? You need to present an idea of a way to do one of those two things. Off the top of my head, I don't think anyone made that mistake this week, so that was good. I will focus very quickly on this part right here that I have on bold. You are only supposed to post one solution, list one advantage, and list one disadvantage. The reason being is because, as I'll show you later as I scroll down the screen, your ideas, your advantages, and your disadvantages all were supposed to be unique. So if you listed off a bunch of ideas and a bunch of advantages, a bunch of disadvantages, you leave less for your classmates. So that's why you would lose points for that. And again, off the top of my head, I think very few people lost points for doing more than one solution, one advantage and one disadvantage. The example I gave, we could say one possible solution would be to require every person to eat only the number of calories that they burned that day. Right? Very simple. Of course, if this was an actual post, I would write more than this, but this is just an example of a solution, advantages and disadvantages. But anyway, one reason this is a good idea, i.e. one of the advantages, is that it could decrease the number of resources we need, therefore increase carrying capacity, right? So there's the advantages. One reason this is a bad idea, i.e. disadvantage, is that many people don't have the technology to properly determine how many calories they burn. So again, that's just an example of how you can have one idea, right, with one advantage and one disadvantage. Now that in itself wouldn't be sufficient for a post, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about why here shortly. For your response, you needed to respond to at least two classmates to their proposed solution, and this is where I started seeing more points being lost. You needed to reply with only one advantage and one disadvantage that they did not list. Right? A lot of you, for the sake of discussion, a lot of these replies were great because you said, hey, I like this about your idea. I dislike that about your idea. Here's why I think your idea might be actually wrong. There were great discussions, but for the sake of grading, you missed this one sentence right here, right? This one line right here was a very important line because you didn't, or I shouldn't say you, quite a few of you did not list one advantage and one disadvantage. It was that simple. That's what you need to do for the points. And yes, there was a little bit more to it, but I'll come to that here in a second as well. Here we have this note. Your ideas do not have to be feasible or ethical. Excuse me. Let me let somebody in. Can you hear me? Yay, all right. We got somebody here. It's only me, and so far I'm talking to myself. So let me just finish what I'm doing, talk about this discussion, and then I'll come to you. Is that okay? All right, here we go. So, like I said, I'll finish my thought here on the discussion, and then I'll talk to you here. But anyway, regarding the discussion, the notes that I have here your ideas do not have to be feasible or ethical. The reason being is the purpose of this discussion is really to look at the advantages and disadvantages of different solutions. And more importantly, as far as grading is concerned, to demonstrate that you understand the concepts of carrying capacity and population growth. Elizabeth, if you don't mind, I'm going to put you on mute. I'm sorry. I'll unmute you when I'm done, though. So yeah, that was the purpose here. Was the main thing was here to show that you understand carrying capacity and that you understand population growth. And yes, because of that, we're not really looking at ways to increase carrying capacity or decrease human population growth. So because of that, it would be okay to list something feasible or that wasn't feasible or that wasn't ethical. And also, in this situation where we're just brainstorming, basically, even though you might come up with a non-feasible idea or an unethical idea, the advantages and disadvantages might actually be something that we could springboard off of and come up with an idea that is feasible or ethical. But anyway, before I get into the nitty-gritty of the discussion points, I will say one of the big overall problems that I see every semester is when in regards to population here, we're talking about population growth, right? We're not talking about the population itself. So I've seen a few people make the mistake of saying, yes, we should reduce the human population. And I'm not saying that. That's not what this discussion is about, because that's literally, if you're going to reduce the human population, that's mostly talking about killing people, right? Or so yeah, that's not what it was. That's why I put an emphasis on this word growth. We're talking about reducing human population growth. Moving forward, actually, before we move forward, I'll ask you, Elizabeth, do you have any questions so far about the discussion? And I actually, like I said, I put you on mute, but you can unmute yourself. Sorry. All right. I just assume you don't have questions. I'll move forward. But if you do have a question, let me know.
No questions. I'm good.
Okay, perfect. All right. Now to the nitty gritty with the actual grading. I mentioned this in the last video. I'll mention it again. Basically, errors, usually you only lose 1 point if you have errors, whether it be factual errors, typing, spelling, anything like that. However, if you have like a really short paper and I can tell you were just, I would say doing the bare minimum, but not even that. If you weren't even doing the bare minimum, then you would probably lose 1 point for each error that you have. Moving forward, I already mentioned this, and I don't think anyone did this. You can't just say, you weren't supposed to just say, increase carrying capacity or decrease population growth. You were supposed to give an idea to how to do that, which reminds me, let me back up. Factual errors. One mistake, or errors in general, one mistake I saw quite a few times, and I'm hoping it was just typos and people didn't misunderstand, but people were writing about decreasing carrying capacity. So please, if you're watching this video and don't understand what carrying capacity, let me know. Carrying capacity is like the maximum number, in this context anyway, the maximum number of humans that the Earth can sustain, right? So we do not want to reduce carrying capacity, because that would mean we would have fewer resources, we could sustain less people. So I did see that error. It was very strange. So again, if you need clarification with what carrying capacity is, please let me know. Moving forward, proposing a possible solution that has already been listed by another student. Yes, you would lose a point for that, but that's just one out of a total of 25. So your grade wouldn't be hurt too much if you lost that point. And I'll go ahead and tell you how I did this. I didn't cross-check your posts with everyone else's. The only way you lost points for this is if it had been used so many times that I just remembered off the top of my head that I've seen it before, right? So I'm not I didn't write them all down. There was no cross-referencing. So if you lost a point, it's most likely because your idea was used a lot. And the most common one I saw was restricting the number of children people could have. That was the most commonly used. I already talked about this, but you're supposed to list an advantage of your idea. You're supposed to list a disadvantage of your idea. Again, I already discussed why you're only supposed to use one for the sake of your classmates. And here's the big part. these two right here. You're supposed to demonstrate that you understand the concept of carrying capacity and the concept of population growth. At the very least, you need to define both of them and then somehow work that into, your post. Make sure that you demonstrate you understand those two concepts. Most people did pretty good with that. This is a common mistake I see, and I assume I'm preaching to the choir because anybody, Elizabeth, who's here, or anybody who's watching the video probably heard me say this last week, but you need to have a reference for everything you post, and you need to make it obvious how you use your source, right? So it's not sufficient to just write something and at the bottom of it put any link. And that's what used to happen when I first started teaching this. People just leave a link and it really had nothing to do with their discussion. So make sure in your discussion you say something like, according to whatever.org, the population growth would hypothetically do this if we implemented my idea. Whatever the case may be. That reminds me of something. Moving forward, and I'm going to adjust the prompts to make sure that this is in writing, but moving forward, you need to use, it is right there. Other than your textbook, right? Yes, I know you have a textbook, but the idea here is to, you definitely can use your textbook, but you also need to use an additional resource in your post. So make sure you have at least one source other than your textbook. For the responses, this is pretty straightforward. We already talked about errors. I already spoke earlier about how people had great discussions for the sake of discussion, but for the sake of grading, they didn't address these two things, right? List an advantage, list a disadvantage. Many people missed points on that. And again, if your advantage or disadvantage was listed a lot, you would have lost 1 point. Again, 1 out of 25, not many. And again, I didn't cross-reference it. So if you lost a point for that, it was because your idea was used so much that it stood out to me. And then, as I've already addressed, make sure that you use a reference and use it properly. Let me check my notes before I take questions here. Discussions, feedback. Yes, okay. Another thing I should let you know is apparently one of your classmates told me you guys were getting an email for every single post, which, in some ways is good because in a perfect world, you could read every single post that your classmates post. But I realized that that's too much. So I went in and changed it. So here's what it looks like on my end. You can see here, I have it now to optional subscription for the rest of the semester. What it was, I think it was on either auto or forced subscription, but either way, I've made the change, and from now on, you should not get an email for every post. That being said, I do highly recommend that you subscribe at least to your own posts. That way you see when people reply to you and things like that. What else for discussions? There was that. Grades, I've already talked about the discussion grades, fixing old mistakes. Okay, I'm going to discuss this a little bit later. But throughout the semester, you can always go back and fix old mistakes for half credit. Now, in the case of discussions, that's a little bit different. If you go back, for example, really the only thing you can do for a discussion is post more stuff, right? So if you didn't do an initial post, go ahead and post one. You'll get half credit, half of what you would have earned because it's late. For the responses, same thing. If you want to improve your grades, post more responses. And again, you'll get half credit for that. The only caveat here is that if you're going to post a response, make sure you follow this, right? You need to respond with an advantage and disadvantage. Previously, when I was grading, if you posted something and it was a great discussion, but it really didn't address what was in the prompt, then you got you still got some points because I could tell you put forth an effort. But here, now that I've reminded you what to do, that if you reply now moving forward to fix your grades, if it doesn't address this, one advantage, one disadvantage, then it won't get any points. So any questions? Okay. Did you have anything you want to say? Not even about the grading, just in general about this idea of increasing carrying capacity or reducing human population growth? All right, that's pretty easy. So let's move forward. We're done talking about the discussion. Let me talk about. Sorry. All right. Actually, I'm looking at my notes here. You have to forgive me. I found some other notes I took regarding the discussion. I think I want to point out you just have to be careful with your wording. So, when it goes back to errors, I read somewhere somebody put farmers are not paid, right? So that's an error. Most likely what you meant to say was farmers are underpaid, which is an opinion that I happen to share. But that's neither here nor there. Just make sure you're careful with what you write. I already talked about how we're not talking about reducing the population. We're talking about reducing human population growth. And of course, I already addressed the whole decrease in carrying capacity thing. So that's it for discussion. Let's look at the lab here. Let me stop sharing this and pull up the lab. Here we go. Actually, what I'm about to show you is I've made some slight changes. So this is going to look a little bit different than what you saw, but it's basically the same. We can talk about the same things. It's a pretty straightforward lab. Most of what you're doing is, going to that website and reading the information and using that information to fill out these questions. And I'm just going to focus on the questions that were mostly missed. I don't think I saw it this semester, but just in case, I'll go ahead and bring it up. Where was the first black form of moth found? Sometimes, or historically, I used to see, I guess people would mistake where for when, and I would get a time frame as opposed to a location. So that was one thing that was missed. What was causing the different colors in the moths? People did lose points for this, and it's actually a very important concept. It was the DNA. It was genetic. That's what caused the difference in the moths. So when this happened, or before the Industrial Revolution, you had this population of moths, and they were mostly light-colored moths. And then, and this has nothing to do with the pollution, there's just a random mutation. So one light-colored moth, some female, she had in her some eggs that were for dark-colored moths, right? Those were the first dark-colored moths that ever existed, in theory. And for the sake of this discussion, we'll go with that. So she laid eggs, those things were born, right? That was completely by chance. It was a completely random mutation, and that's where they came from. And that'll be an important concept. I'll come back to that. So that's what caused the different colors in the moths, was the DNA. Now, granted, if you were to read this question outside of the context of that website, right? As you're going through the website, you understand what I mean by what is causing the different colors in the moths. But if you were just reading this question and you weren't looking at the website, one could argue that it was natural selection that caused the different colors in the moths, or it was the predators, all those other things. But if you're following along on the website, it should be very clear what that question was asking. Question 13, this is pretty straightforward. I think most people did not lose points for this, but basically you're supposed to read what the website said about natural selection and then put it in your own words. And some important things you need to talk about or at least understand with natural selection. Again, it's the variation, right? The variation that came about by mutation. That's what starts it. You have to have variation. And when it comes to variation, one of those variants needs to have some sort of advantage. In the case of the moth, obviously, being dark in a polluted forest, it gave it an advantage, right? So all those moths that were dark happen to have an advantage, right? It was all random, but they happen to have an advantage. The ones that were light happen to have a disadvantage. And because of that, more of the dark ones survived, more of the light ones died. So the dark ones reproduced more than the light ones. So over time, and this is a key thing here too, we're talking about generations, change from generation after generation. Over time, the population changed from being mostly light-colored moths with few dark-colored moths to mostly dark-colored moths with few light-colored moths. And that's another important distinction here. It was the population that changed, right? Population changes in natural selections. Individuals don't change. So using the moths again as an example, there was no light-colored moth that said, uh-oh, I'm in a polluted forest, I'm sticking out like a sore thumb, I'm going to change myself and become dark, right? That did not happen. No moth changed colors. The population changed from being mostly light to mostly dark. Before I move forward, are there any questions on that? All right. So anyway, those are very important concepts, questions 12 and 13. That's why I spent so much time talking about it. 14, it was J.W. Tutt who suggested this. Not a very important concept. It's just proving that you were reading the website and paying attention. Some people lost points because they chose Charles Darwin, which, at least you're on the right track, because Charles Darwin we associate with natural selection. But yeah, the answer to that was not Charles Darwin. What is industrial melanism? Most people got that right. I will say, I will discuss the wrong answers because I see it a lot, was that living things respond to natural selection, which is a true statement. Excuse me. But that is too broad, right? That's not industrial melanism. So if I were to say, giraffes became taller over tens of thousands of years, yeah, that would fall under living things respond to natural selection, but that is not industrial melanism, right? So if your answer was living things respond to natural selection, it's a correct statement, but it is an incorrect answer because it is too broad. Any questions about that? All right, another commonly missed question was this, and this goes back to paying attention to what you're doing. The question asked, how do scientists test theories? And the most common wrong answer was they test theories by making predictions. And clearly, I can tell how this happened. You're reading the website, and it says most scientists test theories by, right? And then it says they test theories by making predictions. And then it went on to say other things. But people, I guess they weren't paying enough attention, just took that and copied the part where it says they make predictions, and they put that as the answer. But think about that. That's not testing a theory. So again, using natural selection as an example, I could say, let's see, I'm going to make a prediction here. And again, that was usually the wrong answer, is that they make predictions. I predict that in 500 years, let's say 1,000. I predict in 1,000 years, there will be no more races, right? There will be no more dark-skinned people and light-skinned people. I think everybody will be medium-skinned, right? Or medium-toned. That's my prediction. Now, did I test a theory? No, I just made a prediction. Of course, in that situation, to test the theory, I'd have to wait 1,000 years. But the point here is you can't just make a prediction, right? Making a prediction is not testing anything. What you do is you make a prediction, and then you do some experiments to see if your prediction is correct. So, again, not that much of an important concept necessarily, but it does show that people who put that answer may not have been paying very close attention. So just make sure you're paying attention to what you're putting in, especially if it's an easy lab like this, which unfortunately this portion of it is almost copy and paste. So just make sure you're paying attention. What are some other ones that I saw that were wrong? Those were usually right. I don't think anyone missed this other than people who didn't fill it out. But I'll be honest, obviously I have no way of knowing if your numbers matched what was actually on the website. So the only thing I'd look for is make sure that they added up to 100%. So, if 60% were dark, then obviously we would need 40% light. Or if 80% were dark in this forest, then we would need 20% dark, so on and so forth. 26, I don't think anyone missed this. Basically, you're just repeating yourself. Explain why the dark one survived in the dark forest and the light one survived in the light forest. 27, quite a few people missed this, but it was not because they wrote down something incorrect. It's just because they did not give enough information. Again, this whole idea of natural selection, there was a certain trait, being dark in this case, was an advantage. And this advantage led the ones that had that advantage to reproduce more. Therefore, they would produce more offspring. Therefore, and this is the important part that a lot of people missed out, the population will change over time, right? That's the whole thing, is the population is changing over time. So those are some of the reasons people missed that question. Number 28, what would happen if there was no predators in the forest? Would the colors of the moths change? The simple answer, right? If you were to know nothing about natural selection, if you've never read about it in the textbook and never learned it in any other class, the simple answer would be no. Because in this situation, the only reason the population changed is because being dark was an advantage because it hid them from the predators, right? There's no other reason that was an advantage. That being said, I did put this right here, defend your answer, because in real life, there are some situations where it would change. First of all, as some people correctly put, maybe being light or dark would have some advantage other than, avoiding predators, right? In which case your answer was correct. Another thing, as you will learn or have already learned in the textbook, is there are other types of evolution. Natural selection is just one type of evolution. There's also things called genetic drift, for example, and that's when things just change by chance. So for example, I bet if you were to look at the percentage of people with blue eyes throughout the years, I bet that percentage has changed. Not because there's necessarily any advantage or disadvantage to having blue eyes, but I bet because of genetic drift, the numbers will just happen to change, right? They're not going to not going to remain constant. But anyway, that's just one example. And that's it. I will point this out. Please make sure before you upload your file, you save it as a PDF. And I know that sounds like I'm being nitpicky, but this is for two reasons. And the biggest reason, well, no, let's just focus on this only reason. You need to save it as a PDF because very often if you upload it as whatever document or whatever format it's already in, then things are lost in the process. So you'll lose points simply because as I'm looking at your paper, some questions will just be missing from the document, and you don't want to do that. So that's it specifically for this lab. Do you have any questions about this lab? All right. I will point out, as I said earlier, you can still go back and fix old mistakes, right? Whether it be module 1 or module 2 or, always moving forward, you can go back and fix your old labs. The only thing is, as I already said earlier, is if it's past the due date, then it's going to be half credit. So, just leave it at that. It's going to be half credit. So even if you go back and fix your mistakes and your new lab, the new thing you submit is perfect, you still won't have a perfect grade, but it will be improved from your original grade. I think that's it for the labs. Oh yeah, the feedback. Let me show you guys this, because a lot of people are asking, wait, what did I miss? And what happens is I put little X marks on the things you miss. And some people say they can't see it. So let me show you very quickly where you can find this. Yeah, let's go here. I put this in the very first announcement. So we go over here, sort of the home screen of this course. If you go under announcements, all right, welcome to environmental biology. This is the very first announcement. And then if we look under labs, yeah, there we go. Look under labs. This tells you all the stuff I've already told you before, but let me scroll to the pertinent information. Oh, yeah, right here. This gives you the directions on how to find it. Regarding lab feedback, you will see instructor feedback on your assignment submission. There's two ways you can see it. As text comments in the comments area of the assignment page. So that's the easy part. When you pull it up, you will see my text comments, and some of you have replied to them, so I can tell you you are seeing them. And then there's also annotations. So there are annotations within the copy of your submitted PDF file, and that will appear in the file feedback area at the bottom of the assignment page. Now, I don't know what it looks like on your end, and this is, I think, a big flaw of Moodle. I wish they would let me click a button and pretend like I was a student and see what things were like on your end, especially in this situation, because then I could make a video and show you how to do this. But what I do know is that on your end, when I'm done grading something, it saves it as a file. So what you can do is download that file, then open it. So it'll look just like your file, except there'll be little X marks where I put X marks. If anybody has any suggestions or can help me make a video perhaps to where I could share it with the rest of the students, that would be great. I'll give you extra credit for that. Just email me beforehand so we can work that out. And that's it for the lab. That's also it for the discussion. We're almost done. This is good. Let's talk about the exam. And this is going to be where the interesting part is, because unless you are watching this video, or Elizabeth, like you're live here, you're not going to know this. And I'm doing this on purpose because this is for the people who are going above and beyond. For this exam, since the grades weren't exactly where I wanted them to be, I will allow you to retake it as many times as you want. I have to go in there and make that change. And moving forward, for these retakes, the retakes are not examined. The retakes are not timed, so you don't have to worry about being quick about it. It's not 50 minutes anymore. The retakes are open book, so you don't need to worry about that. You can use notes, you can use your book, you can use help, just don't copy. What else? What was one more caveat to the retakes? Oh yeah, and the caveat is that it's going to be an average. So yes, you can take it as many times as you want, but it'll be your average grade that sticks. So say, for example, you got an 80, right? And then you take it again and you get a 100. That's easy, right? Then you can be done because you got a perfect score, right? And if you had an 80, then you had a 100, then your new average is going to be 90. That's pretty simple, right? Well, let's say you take it again and you get an 80. Then you take it again. Excuse me. Let's say you originally got an 80. You retake it the first time, you get a 90. Then you try it again. I don't know. You get an 85. Then you try it again and you get a 95. And I should have put this on the screen so you can see it. Here we go. I'll just show you this way. Entire screen. All right, you should be able to see my screen. But anyway, like I said, if you first got an 80, then you tried it again, you got a 90 this time. You didn't like that, you tried it again, but somehow you got lower score this time, you got an 85. Then finally you get a 95, and you're like, all right, that's it. I'm done with that, right? So take that. You did it 4 times, so divide that by 4 to get your average, and your average is going to be 87.5. So it's still an increase. My point here is what I want you to do in a perfect world, you're only going to retake it once, and you're going to take it very seriously, because if you get the 100 points the first time you retake it, then you're done, right? You'll have a great grade, and you can leave it at that. Yeah, so that's it. Again, I'm going to make the change. Once it's done, you can go in there and take it as many times as you want, and we'll take your average. And here's the other catch, and this is to protect you guys. No matter what, your grade cannot get lower than your original grade. So again, going back to my original example, if you first scored an 80 and you keep trying and trying and trying again to get a better grade, if at the end of the day your grade ends up being lower, then just let me know and I'll go in there and manually change your grade back to the original grade that you earned. Because I don't want you to lose points. The idea here is for you to give it another shot and hopefully help your grade. So I guess that's it. Elizabeth, did you have any questions?
Nope, no questions. I'm glad we're able to retake that test.
Yeah, and I really, like I said, the grades were pretty horrible, but that's, I shouldn't say horrible, I'm sorry. The grades weren't where I wanted them to be, but that's expected. The first exam of the semester is usually like that, because even though I said in the study guide, I said, hey, these questions are worded very oddly. People don't, I guess they don't believe that, or they think, oh, it can't be that bad. But it is, and now you guys know. So moving forward, maybe you'll take me up on the offer to do a proctored exam where it's no longer timed. But yeah, from here moving forward, whenever the grades aren't as I feel like they should be for a 100 level class, this will always be the situation where you can retake it. So
okay. I believe I got an 84, and I was pretty upset.
Well, yeah, good. This will help then. But again, even if we do this moving forward with the other exams, the idea here is that it's an average. So you never want to phone it in, because even though you might get to retake it again, obviously the higher you start, the higher you'll end up with. And again, I think that'll be the last thing I say, but this goes back to this idea of extra credit. I've been offering extra credit here and there, and I'm about to offer a lot more. A lot of times people say, hey, can you apply it to this? Can you apply it to that? And sometimes I'll say, you might want to hold off. And this is a great example. So for the exams, you might want to hold off on applying your extra credit until you know what your final exam grade is, or your final grade for the exam one is, because you don't want to apply it yet. You want to do it at the very end when you get the most out of it, the most bang for your buck, so to speak. And speaking of extra credit, Elizabeth and anybody who's watching the video, just email me, tell me you watched the video. I'll give you 2 points of extra credit. And in your email, just tell me where you want me to apply the 2 points of extra credit. And also, except for Elizabeth, who's here live, let's just leave one sentence that describes something from this video. So I know you just didn't skip to the end and got that information. So that's it on my end. And so, Elizabeth, you don't have anything else?
Nope, nothing from me.
All right. Well, thank you for coming, and have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too.